Hi everybody, welcome to Right to the Top. I'm Adam. In today's video, I'm going to continue speaking to you about adding complexity to your writing. So we're going to look at some grammar, but more specifically, we're going to look at the passive voice. Now, recently I made a video about how to add complexity to your writing. And one of the different things I mentioned were the specific structures, the complex structures like the causative, the subjunctive, etc. And one of them was the passive. So today we're going to look at how to use the passive in terms of construction, how to build one, when to use it, okay, in what situations it's a good idea to use it, and then when to avoid it, when you shouldn't use it. And especially the avoiding one, this is the most applicable to a lot of you out there because a lot of you are using the passive when you really shouldn't be, just for word count, but I'll get into the details as we go. So let's start with the construction, how to build a passive structure, okay? So we're gonna start with the be verb. You're gonna have a be verb plus a past participle. This is the third verb. Eat, ate, eaten. Eaten is the past participle. Notice that I have a little asterisk here, a little star there, because you're gonna be using the be verb, but not always. There are exceptions, okay? And I'll show you what those exceptions are in a moment. And make sure that the be verb is the verb that takes the tense, okay? Again, in tense verbs, past, present, future, the be verb is the one taking the tense, not the past participle. Now, a few highlights of the passive. And don't worry, I'm gonna show you examples of all of these as well. The subject. Remember in the passive, the subject of the clause or the sentence is receiving the action. It is not doing the action. It is not responsible for the action. The action is coming to it. It is taking the action. The subject in a passive sentence was the object in an active sentence. And I'll show you that as well. Again, use it with all the tenses, but again, another double asterisk here. One tense you shouldn't use it with, and I'll show you that one as well. You can use it with other verb forms, and you can use the infinitive or the base be. So if you're using the passive with other verbs like modal verbs, then you're not going to be putting a tense on the be verb. The be verb is infinitive or base, and I'll show you examples of that. You can combine it with other structures like the causative or the subjunctive. And again, the causative, there's no be verb in there, and I'll show you an example of that. And you can use it in a reduced clause. Basically, you're creating a participle or a participle phrase. Now, this means that this used to be a full clause with a be verb, but you took out the conjunction, you took out the be verb, you're left with a participle. So let's look at examples of all of these. Okay, so let's start with a basic or simple active sentence. The company increased output to meet growing demand. The company is the subject, increased output. So increased, this is the action that the company did. Output, that's the object. Increased what? The output. And why? To meet growing demand, not so important at this point. Active sentence, subject doing the verb to the object. In the passive sentence, the object is now the subject. It is going to receive the action. So output was increased. Now, I don't need to mention by the company. I don't need to mention an agent. Okay? Once the original subject in the active sentence goes into the passive, it is now called an agent. Sometimes it's necessary, sometimes it's not, and we'll talk about that in a moment as well. So here, output was increased. It's kind of clear that it's the company that did it, or whoever is responsible for the output, or it's just not important. So I can take the agent out. Output was increased to meet growing demand. So I have the simple past verb, was, because that's the past verb of be, increased, doesn't change. This is a regular verb, ed verb. Increase, increased, increased, okay? Output is generally increased according to demand. Simple present verb. When demand goes up, output goes up. When it goes down, output goes down. So is increased. Simple verb. Is the simple present verb of be. Output will be increased if demand grows. Will be, future, increased, doesn't change. In order for output to be increased, there must first be an increase in demand. So here I don't even have a clause. I'm using to be increased as an infinitive passive, okay, for output to be increased. Infinitive, there's no agent, there's no subject, verb, etc. There must first be an increase, and then you have your actual independent clause following that. So this is part of the complement. Infinitive, passive, complement, okay? So you see all the tenses plus infinitive, and the be verb adjusts accordingly. Now, past continuous was being done, present continuous is being done. Notice that we don't have, or we don't use a future continuous. Will be being done. It's just unnecessary. We just say will be done for the future. So don't use a future continuous passive. That's the only tense that it doesn't really apply to. Now, a note. And this is where a lot of people make mistakes when it comes to the passive, in terms of the reading or in terms of the writing. Be verb plus a present participle, which means a verb in an ing form, is going to be a continuous tense. Okay? He is playing. Continuous tense, active, not passive. If you have be plus being plus an adjective, for example, he is being helpful, it's also a continuous active tense. It's not a passive. So be very careful. A lot of people get confused with the is being. They automatically think that it's a passive. The only time you're joining a be verb with an active verb is in the continuous tense or in the passive. Make sure you know which one you're dealing with, okay? So let's go on to the next one. Had been fixed, past perfect. We have the had, still have the been. Been is the past participle, and I still have another past participle. So with the perfect tenses, you have two past participles. The be verb takes the perfect tense. Had been fixed, has been fixed, have been fixed, will have been fixed. Past, present, future, perfects tenses. Now, here I'm joining it with other verbs. Must. Must is a modal. Must be considered, because after must, there's no tense. You take the base verb, must be considered. Should have been given. So should is the modal. Have is the base, been is the base, given is the participle. Is going to be, future, but we have the infinitive, to be given, okay? Still passive. And is to be given. This is part of the causative, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So you see, passive applies to all the different tenses, and it can be combined with other verbs. Make sure that you always have a be verb when necessary. Make sure that you don't confuse present participles with past participles, active and passive. Make sure that the be verb is joining a past participle to make a passive. Those are the key highlights. Now, let's look at the causative. So again, remember the asterisk from a couple of pages ago? The company will have the package delivered to your door. The company will have the package delivered by the courier to your door. Again, I don't need to mention the agent unless it's important, but I'm using a passive here, so will have, just for future, the company had the package delivered. Notice that I don't have a be verb. In the causative, it's just unnecessary. And again, you can have all tenses. Had the package delivered, is having, has the package delivered, etc. The be verb is going, the only time you use the be verb is for the continuous, is having the package delivered. Subjunctive. And I'll make a separate video about the causative. This might be a little bit confusing because you have, in a causative sentence, you have a subject, you have an agent, you have two verbs. It's a little tricky. I'll make a video about that. The subjunctive, I already made a video. You can check the link up here. It is important that engineers be given. So here we have the be as the base be. Okay? In the subjunctive, After the that clause begins, that, subject, base verb. In the passive, the base verb is the be verb plus the past participle. And in a participle, so research that was conducted, when the conjunction of the adjective clause is also the subject and it's followed by a be verb, I can take them out. Okay? Just take them out of the clause entirely, have a reduced clause that becomes a participle phrase. Research conducted at Harvard University shows that. So conducted at Harvard, that's your participle clause. And again, no be verb needed here. I took it out in the participle. Now, another note to be careful about, and this is where people get confused as well. Sometimes you can see a be verb plus an adjective participle, not a verb. It's technically a verb, but it's acting as an adjective, so it's a little bit tricky. It's not a passive. It's not considered a passive. Management is disappointed with the latest results. Management is feeling disappointed, right? So disappointed is not a verb, it's an adjective. Disappointed, disappointing. Bored, boring. Confused, confusing. Make sure you know the difference between ed and ing adjectives, okay? So here, this is not a passive. This is an active sentence. Management is, okay, what is it? Like, I am Canadian. It's an active sentence. There's nothing going on. It's just a situation. Management is what? What's the situation? Disappointed. Why or with what? Etc. The shirt was worn through. Worn through means it was like had holes and stuff because it was used so much. Old shirt used a lot, starting to show patches and holes. But again, active sentence, not passive. Be very careful about that. Be especially careful about this situation in the reading section because they will try to trick you with, especially when you have like a sentence in the reading, in the question, and then you have to match it to that sentence in the passage, and they're going to play with your understanding of the passive to see if you understand what's going on. So pay attention to that, okay? A little tip there for the reading section. Okay, now, when to use it. And this is probably the most important. By now, if you're taking the IELTS or the TOEFL, you're not a beginner English learner. You're past that stage. You're out of the ESL class, you're in the IELTS class, you're in the TOEFL class. They already assume that you know how to use the passive, like how to construct it, how to understand it. When to use it, that's a different matter. This is where a lot of people get in trouble. Now, a lot of teachers will also tell you, don't use the passive. Okay, it's poor, it's weak, it's whatever, bad English. It's not. The passive structure is just a tool among many tools you have to write with. Use it. Just use it appropriately and correctly. So the main reason to use it is for variety. If you have like active sentences, active sentences, active sentences, and they're all simple sentences, you don't have any variety. Passive just gives you a little bit of variety, just show other structures. That way the reader also doesn't get bored if it's all the same type of sentences, okay? So you use it for sentence variety, structure variety, add complexity to your writing, and to condense sentences, to shrink two sentences into one, and you can use the passive to do that as well. If you want to change the subject, if the person or thing doing the action is really not important, take it out. Use the passive and focus on the important information, right? If the subject is unknown, then how are you going to write? You can use there or it or they. A little bit weak sentence. It's better to use the passive and put a strong subject in rather than a weak one. If the subject or the thing or person doing the action is irrelevant or not important, take it out. If it's obvious, the reader can understand without being told, take it out, okay? Remove acting agent. So if the thing doing the action is not important, get rid of it. Use the passive. This is the one I especially want you to pay attention to. How to use the passive is a cohesive device, to add cohesion, to link ideas, to link sentences together. I'm going to show you an example, but as a cohesive device, you're actually getting two benefits out of a passive. One, you're getting the variety in terms of the grammar, your grammatical range and accuracy score. So you're showing variety, you're showing ability with the grammar, but you're also showing good cohesion, right? Your ideas connect and flow well together. And again, this is a little bit trickier, so I'll show you the example in a moment. Or to shift focus, link sentences, shift focus. The last one, I put this in bracket because this is for much more advanced writers. This is not something you need to consider so much for the IELTS or TOEFL, but just so you understand, we can use the passive to slow the pace of the reading. So for example, if you have like a few short sentences, short, simple, short, simple, short, simple sentence, it reads very quickly. So if you suddenly want to slow down the reading, like for the reader to slow down, you present a longer sentence. And one way to do that is to introduce that sentence with a passive. While it can easily be argued that something, something, and then you go on to the contrast after that, right? So then you have a complex, long sentence that really slows down the pace. Don't worry too much about this. Again, more advanced writers, more advanced writing, not necessarily IELTS or TOEFL essay. Okay, variety. A government has a duty to develop infrastructure. This will allow an economy to prosper and for citizens to gain more from it. Simple sentence, simple sentence. If a government introduces better transportation services, for example, they can help increase productivity by minimizing traffic congestion, thereby reducing workers' commute time and stress levels. Complex sentence, complex structure. So 2 simples, 1 complex, 49 words. Not bad, not wrong, but here's an opportunity to show a little variety, use a little something different, and help already start condensing. So here's a rewrite of the same idea. I took out 9 words, so I made it shorter. I changed some of the other words, I changed some of the order. I kept the message though. And I only have 2 sentences instead of 3. And both of them are complex sentences now. A nation in which transportation infrastructure, for example, is sufficiently developed can increase worker productivity by reducing commute times and workers' stress levels. Thus, a government is obliged to promote this development, thereby improving the economy and its citizens' benefits. So, okay, obviously I changed some of the wording. Again, wording is very important, but I also put in a passive just to help me squeeze more information into a tighter spot, okay? And that's why I'm using it for. And I have 2 complex sentences, which will get me a higher score on from the graders, okay? Now, let's talk about the subject. Studies conducted at X University by the country's leading sociologists confirmed that. Why do that? Just put them as subjects. If you don't need, so here, studies conducted at X University by all these people. Right now, there's really no purpose to it. You can have a much stronger sentence by just putting in the sociologists first. And again, the thing to remember is you're actually putting a little bit of an emphasis on them. So it's important to understand, are they important or not? But remember this sentence, I'm gonna come back to it. Cohesion, very, very important. So it's a little bit tricky, but you'll understand when I explain it. One, we're talking about obesity and some causes and solutions of childhood obesity and how to, solutions anyway. So one possible solution to childhood obesity is to make it more difficult for them to consume products of high empty calorie content. If schools, for example, removed sugary drinks from their cafeterias, children would no longer be able to access them on a regular basis. So now, again, not wrong, can be better. How? The last thing I mentioned in the first sentence is products of high empty calorie content. The first thing I mentioned in the second sentence is schools. There's no connection between these 2 ideas. So what I want to do is I want to bring these sugary drinks closer to products of high calorie content, because the sugary drinks are an example of this type of product. So I want to make that link closer and right away and stronger. How do I do that? I use a passive, okay? If sugary drinks, for example, were removed from school cafeterias, and then I go on. So right away, I end with products of high calorie content, and I begin with sugary drinks. Right away, there's a link, a very clear, cohesive link between one idea and the next. And how did I do that? Just by moving it into a passive form and putting the drinks as the subject instead of the schools, because the schools are not important. The drinks are important. And this will get you higher score on the cohesion and coherence category of the scoring. And sometimes you want to just shrink sentences, okay? Many companies these days prefer job candidates with good qualifications and strong interpersonal skills. This is because these workers can ... whatever they can do, right? So I have a lot of useless information here. Squeeze it all into one passive sentence. Job candidates with good qualifications and strong interpersonal skills are preferred. Well, if they're job candidates, then who prefers them? The hiring, the employers, the companies. So I don't need to mention it. Are preferred these days because they can. So right away, I can go straight to they because it's job candidates, and there's nothing else I can really connect to, and have job candidates as the subject, they as the subject of the next clause, right? So it's a lot smoother, it's a lot tighter, it's a lot shorter. Okay, that's why we would use the passive, are preferred. Now, when should you not use the passive? And this is also very, very important, okay? This is costing you points, and this is very common. A lot of people are doing this on their essays, right? When it's not necessary. Now, you're thinking, well, when is it not necessary, right? Well, if it serves no purpose, or if the active voice would work better, then it's unnecessary. But this is especially it. If it serves no purpose. If you're just using it to get your word count up, the graders know that. Your professors in university know that. It's a waste of words. The passive, in some structures, can just be a waste of words. Use those extra words to say important things, right? If the active voice is better and shorter, use it. Okay, and it's also stronger in most cases. So make sure there's a reason for using it. So here are a couple of examples, and I mentioned this one before. Research conducted at X university has found that. So here I'm using the passive participle. Why not just say researchers have found that? Research conducted at is just unnecessary. Just say researchers found. Obviously, the researchers did research. They conducted research. I don't need to mention it. It's a waste of a word, okay? But again, not wrong, just a waste. Studies conducted by the country's leading sociologists. If you're not going to mention these sociologists again in your essay, that means they're not important, okay? So, two things. Sociologists confirm that. If you want to mention who confirmed it, just to give it a little bit of support, just say sociologists. Who cares if they're leading or not? You have an active sentence. You get right away to the main idea, which is that university graduates, half of them don't end up in their field. Use a passive. Get rid of this information as quickly as possible. Focus on the main idea, okay? Now, these expressions especially, every time a student sends me an essay to check and I see this, cross it out, cross it out, cross it out. It is believed by some people that, ... 7 words. Why not just say some people believe? This is not important. This beginning is not important. What comes after that is important. You want to get to it more quickly. The more words you have before that, the more you lose the reader's attention. Get to it as quickly as possible. Active, short, move on. In IELTS Task 1, this is a very common thing I see. It can be seen in the graph that 30%. It can be seen in the graph. First of all, you introduced what we're looking at in the introduction paragraph. Everything that comes in the body is from the graph. You don't need to tell me that. And you especially don't need to tell me that in a passive form. If you really feel you need to introduce the graph, according to the graph. Just say that and then just get to your actual point quickly. This looks like it's just trying to build the word count to get to your minimum. It's not going to work. The graders know what you're doing. You're going to actually lose points, not gain points for these passive structures. Okay? And that's it. I know a lot of information there, but the passive can be very useful if used correctly, if used in the right context, in the right situations. I suppose you could say that they are necessary and that they are better than an active voice. In 8 out of 10 situations, the active is better. The 2 situations that the passive is better, use it, okay? But use it correctly. Now, if you have any questions about this video, please ask me in the YouTube comment section. Don't forget to read each other's comments. I will answer the more popular questions at the end of the month in the Q&A. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel and give me a like if you like it as well. And I'll see you again next week with another lesson. See you then. Bye-bye.